There is a storm that rages, not around us, but within, the storm of worry, the wind of fear, the thunder of the unknown, the crashing waves of what if. This is the war of anxiety, and yet, in the midst of this unseen tempest, there was a man who walked upon the waters. And not only did he walk, he spoke, and what he spoke shattered the chaos of the storm and brought forth peace. He said, "Do not be anxious about your life." The world hears this and scoffs. They say, "But how? Don't you see the news? Don't you see the bills, the sickness, the betrayals, the wars, the rising tides?" And yet, this man did not speak from the safety of an ivory tower, but from the dusty roads of poverty, oppression, and crucifixion. He knew what it was to be hated, to be hunted, to be burdened. And still he said, "Do not worry." You see, to the human ear, this sounds like denial, but it's not denial, it's dominion. He wasn't ignoring the storm, he was teaching us how to walk above it. The peace he offered was not the absence of trouble, it was the presence of something greater than trouble, the kingdom of God. He taught us to look to the birds of the air, creatures that neither sow nor reap, yet are fed, not because of their striving, but because of their place in creation. And he says, "Are you not of more value than they?" The lesson is not about birds, the lesson is about identity. If we knew who we are, if we remembered whose we are, anxiety would lose its grip on our souls. The world says, secure yourself. Jesus says, surrender. The world says, build your safety in what you own. Jesus says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. He flips the system. He doesn't teach escape from life's battles. He teaches authority in the midst of them. He says, my peace I give you, not as the world gives, because the peace of this world is fragile, temporary, purchased, lost, but his peace is rooted in eternity. Anxiety is a thief. It robs your moments, your sleep, your joy. But Jesus said, which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? In other words, worry gives nothing, but takes everything. But then he says something deeper. He says, seek first the kingdom, and not seek first the solution, not seek first the escape, but seek first the rule and reign of God in your life, in your heart, in your present moment, and all the rest. These things will be added unto you. The key to inner peace is not the changing of circumstances. It is the changing of focus, from the problem to the provider, from the storm to the one who commands the wind and waves. When Peter looked at the wind, he sank. But when he looked at the face of Jesus, he walked. Peace does not come by looking around. It comes by looking up. The Messiah taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. And not weekly, not monthly, daily, because worry is often rooted in tomorrow, but peace is rooted in today. He brings us into the moment, not a moment of fear, but of trust. He calls us not to figure everything out, but to follow. And what does he say to the storm of your soul? Peace. Be still, and when he speaks those words, demons flee, chains break, minds are calmed, and the impossible becomes the path you walk. The same voice that calmed the Sea of Galilee is the voice that speaks to you now, not a voice of condemnation, but of calling. He's not saying you'll never face the storm, he's saying you'll never face it alone, and even in the storm you can have the peace that passes understanding. Not the peace of circumstance, but the peace of presence, the peace that is not of this world, because it comes from beyond this world. So lift your eyes, set your mind on the things above, silence the noise, and listen. The Prince of Peace is walking toward your boat. He's not panicked. He's not shaken. He stands above the storm, and so shall you. Do not be anxious. Seek first his kingdom, and the storm will not master you. You will walk in the calm of eternity. Now, true peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of Christ within them. This is not merely a poetic statement. It is a revelation of a spiritual truth that transcends emotion, logic, and circumstance. In the world, peace is often defined as the elimination of conflict, the resolution of all problems, or the soothing of external conditions, but the peace that Jesus taught and demonstrated is not dependent on the outer environment. It is a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace that abides in the soul even when the world around is falling apart. The disciples once found themselves on a boat in the middle of a violent storm. The winds howled, the waves crashed, the sky grew dark. Panic overtook seasoned fishermen, and yet in that same boat Jesus was asleep, resting, calm. Why? Because he carried a different kind of peace, an inner stillness rooted not in the condition of the sea, but in his communion with the Father. He knew who he was, he knew where he stood, and he knew the authority that rested upon him. This picture is not just a historical account. It is a mirror for our lives. We, too, board boats that sail into storms, the storms of uncertainty, the storms of health crises, financial lack, relationship breakdowns, attacks on the mind, fear of the future, dread of the unknown, and in those moments everything within us seeks to silence the storm by our own strength. We try to row harder, plan deeper, shout louder, and grasp for control. But the more we strive, the more we sink, because peace does not come from effort. It comes from encounter. The presence of Christ is the anchor. Not the idea of Christ, not the memory of Christ, but the living presence of the one who still walks on water and commands the winds. When he is present, the storm loses its power. When he speaks, "Peace, be still," it is not only to the sea, but to the heart of man. Jesus did not promise a life free from storms. In fact, he said, "In this world you will have trouble." But he followed it with this, "Take heart. I have overcome the world." His peace is not fragile, it is not shallow, it is forged in the fire of eternal victory. The peace of Jesus is the same peace that stood before Pontius Pilate without fear, the same peace that walked through the Garden of Gethsemane, the same peace that endured the cross, scorning its shame, knowing what was on the other side. That kind of peace cannot be touched by circumstance. It is rooted in eternity. When Jesus said, "My peace I give to you," he wasn't offering a temporary escape or an emotional bandage. He was offering himself. In our world, we're taught to run from storms, avoid discomfort, numb the pain, escape the pressure. But Jesus walks into the center of the storm and brings heaven with him. He does not teach us to avoid life's battles. He teaches us to carry peace into them. He transforms the storm not by removing it, but by entering it. His peace is not passive. It is a weapon. It rebukes the winds. It stills the waves. It quiets the demons that scream within. And this peace is not found by accident. It is found by abiding. "Abide in me," he said, "and I in you." The branch does not strive to bear fruit. It remains, it rests, and in the same way, we do not manufacture peace. We receive it through connection. When our spirit remains in communion with his, we carry his presence, and therefore, his peace. The mistake we often make is seeking peace in the outcome. We say, "If this works out, I'll be at peace. If the diagnosis is good, I'll feel calm. If the finances improve, I'll finally rest." But that is not the way of the kingdom. Jesus calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. The peace he offers comes before the breakthrough, before the healing, before the restoration. It comes in the prison, not just the palace. It comes in the wilderness, not just the promised land. This peace is a mark of the kingdom. It is not dictated by earthly terms. It does not rise and fall with the stock market. It does not bend with political chaos. It does not fear the news headlines. It is grounded in the eternal throne that never moves, and this throne is occupied by the Prince of Peace. When we live in fear, we allow the storm to define us. We allow the waves to shape our identity. But Jesus calls us to fix our eyes not on the storm, but on him. Peter walked on water, not because he was special, not because he had no fear, but because his eyes were locked on the one who defied the laws of nature. The moment his gaze shifted to the wind, he sank, and so it is with us. Our peace is tied to our focus. If we live consumed by what's wrong, we lose sight of who's right. If we obsess over the threat, we forget the promise. But when we look to Christ, peace is restored, not because the sea is calm, but because we know who stands beside us in the boat. Peace is not weakness. It is power under control. It is knowing the authority that has been given to us. It is knowing that we are not alone, that Emmanuel, God with us, is not a seasonal phrase. It is a present reality, and when he is with us, we are safe, even in the lion's den, even in the furnace, even in the storm. The world may fall apart, but the one whose heart is stayed on him shall be kept in perfect peace. Not ordinary peace, perfect peace, the peace that cannot be shaken, the peace that is a foretaste of heaven, the peace that causes the world to ask, "What manner of man is this?" That is the peace that Jesus taught. That is the peace he lived, and that is the peace he gives. Anxiety thrives in tomorrow, but peace is found in trusting God today. This is the spiritual reality that many overlook as they attempt to navigate the storms of life with logic, prediction, and human understanding. The heart of anxiety is a fixation on what has not yet happened, what might happen, what could go wrong, or what may never come. It pulls the mind into the future, wraps the soul in scenarios that don't yet exist, and steals the strength from the present moment. Jesus addressed this head on when he said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Each day has enough trouble of its own. He was not encouraging irresponsibility. He was awakening us to the danger of misplaced focus. Worry about tomorrow robs today of its purpose. It distracts, weakens, and drains. But peace, true peace, is not found in foreseeing or controlling tomorrow. It is found in anchoring the heart in the presence of God today. Faith, by its very nature, is not about the known, but about trust in the one who knows. God does not give us grace for the imaginary future we create in our minds. He gives us grace for the moment we are in. The Israelites in the wilderness were given manna each day, not enough for the week, not to be stored, not to be controlled, only enough for today. And when they tried to hoard it, it spoiled. This was not just about food. It was a lesson in trust, a lesson in present dependence on the Father's provision. They had to wake up each morning and believe that God would provide again, that He was not just the God of yesterday or someday, but of today. This is where anxiety loses its power, when the heart chooses to remain in today, where God's voice speaks, where His presence dwells, where His provision flows. The enemy knows he cannot steal your salvation, so he tries to steal your peace. He does this by pushing your mind into the territory of what if you fail, what if you get sick, what if they leave, what if the money runs out, what if the dream dies. But God does not dwell in the what if. He reveals Himself as I am, and not I was or I will be, but I am present here now. Anxiety is built on a future that hasn't happened, but peace is built on the presence of God in this moment. The human mind craves control. It wants to plan, predict, and prevent pain. And yet, Jesus invites us into a different rhythm, the rhythm of surrender, not passive defeat, but active trust. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Jesus calls us not to control everything, but to surrender everything. This calling stands in complete contrast to the instinct of the human soul. From the moment we are born, we grasp, cling, strategize, and fight for control. Control of our environment, our relationships, our futures, our reputations. Control feels like safety. Control feels like strength. Control feels like survival. But the kingdom of God moves in the opposite spirit. Gospel does not tell us to take control, it calls us to lay it down. The one who had all power, who created the heavens and the earth with His word, chose to enter into the world not as a ruler on a throne, but as a servant. He emptied Himself, He yielded, He surrendered, and in doing so, He showed us the path to true life. Surrender is not passivity. It is not giving up out of despair. It is not weakness. It is the deliberate act of placing all things into the hands of the one who alone is trustworthy. Jesus never lost control. He gave it. He stood before Pilate and declared, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above." In other words, He was not at the mercy of Rome, or of betrayal, or of death. He surrendered to the will of the Father because He trusted that what God ordains, He will also complete, and we are called to do the same. Anxiety is often rooted in our unwillingness to surrender. The more we cling to control, the more we fear its loss. The more we try to orchestrate every outcome, the more tormented we become by the unknown. But Jesus does not invite us to bear the weight of the world. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." What is rest but the fruit of surrender, to cast our cares upon Him, to entrust our future into His hands, to let go of the illusion that we are the authors of our own lives. He is the author and the finisher. And between those two truths lies the surrender of every page. The cross itself is the ultimate act of surrender. Jesus did not defend Himself. He did not call down angels. He did not retaliate. He submitted to the will of the Father with the words, "Not my will, but yours be done." And in that surrender, salvation was birthed. Life came forth. Curse was broken. What seemed like defeat became the doorway to victory. This is the mystery of the kingdom, that in surrender we find triumph, in yielding we find power, in dying to self we find life eternal. We live in a world that celebrates self-reliance. We are taught to make our own way, build our own name, to create our own legacy, but the gospel shatters this foundation. Jesus taught that the one who loses his life for His sake will find it. The seed must fall into the ground and die to bear fruit. Surrender is not the end, it is the beginning of resurrection. It is the key unlocking peace, purpose, and power, and yet it requires trust. Trust that even when we cannot see, He sees. Trust that when we cannot feel, He is still present. Trust that when all control is surrendered, His sovereignty remains. Many of the burdens we carry are not ours to carry. We carry the burden of outcomes, the burden of what people think, the burden of success, the burden of tomorrow. But Jesus taught us to pray, "Your will be done." That is the prayer of surrender. It is not a prayer of resignation. It is a declaration of faith. Faith that God's plan is better. Faith that His timing is perfect. Faith that what we place in His hands is never lost but redeemed. Abraham surrendered Isaac, not because he had no love for his son, but because he had greater trust in God's promise. And in that surrender, he found the God who provides surrender is not a one-time act. It is a daily posture. Every morning we are invited to lay down our plans, our fears, our control, and receive the peace that comes from trust. Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily and follow me." To take up the cross is to surrender to the path He has for us, even when it leads through Gethsemane, even when it walks through valleys, even when it looks nothing like we expected. But on that path He walks with us. He does not call us to surrender and then leave us alone. He empowers us with His Spirit. He strengthens us in the journey. He transforms us as we yield. The beauty of surrender is that it makes room for God. As long as our hands are clenched, He cannot fill them. As long as we are steering the ship, He does not intrude. But when we open our hands, when we say, "Lord, have your way," heaven invades earth, miracles happen, the impossible becomes possible. The peace that we could never attain through striving comes to rest upon us like a dove. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." To be poor in spirit is to be emptied of self so that He may fill us. That is the posture of surrender. That is where anxiety dies and peace is born. Surrender also frees us from the burden of outcomes. We no longer live under the pressure of making everything work. We become stewards instead of owners. We plant seeds and trust Him for the harvest. We walk by faith, not by sight. We obey, and He brings the increase. This is the rhythm of the surrendered life. It is not always easy. It often requires sacrifice, but it leads to a depth of peace that nothing in this world can offer. The surrendered soul is the soul at rest, not because life is perfect, but because the Lord reigns over every imperfection. And when He reigns in the heart, peace is not just a possibility, it is a promise.